I want to begin with another bit of good news. I think we're all deserving of that nowadays. So I want to tell you all that Israel has recently, this is really from just 2 days ago, Israel has recently been named one of the top global tech ecosystems under the annual Startup Geno survey, together with Silicon Valley, New York, and London. And this is actually a move up to 4th place from being ranked 5th last year. Talk about resilience. Now, as you know, the Israeli climate tech community is a significant part of this tech ecosystem and is a growing ecosystem, in fact. And many of the conversations that we're having here today surround financing for climate tech. One of the key tools that is being talked about, and one of the more complex ones, is carbon markets, of course. There is, I guess, over the past few years, a lot of controversy surrounding carbon markets. But I think that at this point, there is no question that the markets have evolved to a stage where they are clearly said to be one of the key financing tools within an entire portfolio of financing tools for innovative climate technologies. So what we're here to unpack today is the question of how exactly is it possible to introduce carbon markets into business models for climate tech startups. And before we dive into the conversation, I want to quickly introduce our panel. So on the screen, we have with us Carlota, Ochoa, Neven, Mont, a principal at Extantia. Hi, Carlota, and thank you for joining. Boaz Schweiger. Hi. Great to see you. Boaz Schweiger, Executive Chairman at HomeBiogas. Amar CEO of Rewind.
Hello.
And Eli Sandler, Fellow at Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Hi, Eli. Okay. So I think that before we dive into the questions, we have some serious issues to tackle. But before we do that, I'd like each of you to really quickly introduce yourself and why you're here. What is your connection to carbon markets? Just in a few quick sentences. Carlota, can you start, please?
Yeah, sure. So my background is I'm a principal at Extantia, early stage climate tech fund based out of Berlin. I actually started my career in commodity markets, focusing on European energy and carbon markets. It feels like it was a long time ago, but now very relevant again.
Thanks. Boaz, please.
Hi, I'm Boaz from HomeBiogas. HomeBiogas develops a biogas system that turn organic matter into renewable energy and fertilizer. In the carbon market, HomeBiogas is currently developing 5 large-scale projects globally with small farmers. In Kenya, our company in Kenya has installed thousands of systems and has recently certified the project under gold standard, issued credit and sold credit. In Rwanda, we recently received an LOI from the Rwandan government for the approval of the project under Article 6. So, nice speaking.
Great. I'll be asking about that in a minute. Ram, please.
My name is Ram. I'm the CEO of Rewind. We are removing carbon from the atmosphere by leveraging trees that capture carbon, turn them into trees, and taking surplus wood from forests, packaging in these kind of natural material bags, and sequestering them in the bottom of the Black Sea, which naturally preserves carbon for thousands of years.
Fascinating and amazing. I'll be talking to you in a minute about that as well. Eli, please.
I'm Eli Sandler. So I spend about half my time teaching climate finance at the Harvard Kennedy School. I teach a class called Financing the Clean Energy Transition. And then the other half working on really big climate finance deals, including with Boaz. And I think to answer your question about what is the connection with carbon markets, So my class is massive. It's 100 students, and they're all thinking about how to finance the energy transition. And the first class, we show them this graph that says how much investment is there in climate finance today. It's about $1.5 trillion. And how much do we need to get to by 2030? It's about $6 trillion. And at the moment of that $6 trillion, 5 billion is carbon markets, 6 billion, 7 billion. So it's not even 0.1% of the total finance we need. And so my connection to carbon markets is working with a lot of people in the ecosystem to try and say, right now it's less than 1% of the financing stack. So unfortunately, I don't fully agree that it's already an indispensable piece of climate finance. But what can we do to scale that up?
Great. So we're lined up for an interesting conversation here. One piece of information to give us all some food for thought, a very recent report by Carbon Growth Markets and Bloomberg predicts a five-fold growth in carbon credit prices through the year 2030. So there's a lot of potential there, and while I do agree that there's a lot of work to be done on scaling, like Eli says, I think that perhaps there are companies that within their own specific universe can really benefit from specific financing, future purchase agreements, offtake agreements, and so on. And we're going to be unpacking all of that now. So, Boaz, let me turn to you first. You're probably one of the only companies, HomeBiogas, in Israel that can really basically say, okay, we've done this. We have methodology approved. We have a project approved. We are producing credits. Talk to us about that a little bit, and what are your lessons? What do you think this project and these credits, what type of role has this played in the financing of HomeBiogas, looking to the future?
So let's take into account, as an example, the small farmers market. So there are about 200 million farmers that our system can really benefit. And the way we reach them up until now is basically we have to convince a farmer to buy a system. So the farmer might be a little bit reluctant to adopt a new technology. The price, even though it's already affordable, might be a little bit challenging. So we need to invest a lot of money in marketing, in sales, and collections, either directly or through a distributor. Now, the carbon finance brings a whole different opportunities. So, just by the way, in the previous way, we got to about 40,000 systems out of 200 million. So how do we break this gap? So the carbon finance basically provides a quadruple win opportunity. The farmer gets the system at the subsidized price, in some locations even for free. The government or companies that want to mitigate their carbon emission can buy an attractive carbon credit with meaningful impact. Environment, of course, is benefiting from the carbon reduction at a pace which should be much faster than what we are doing today. And of course, HomeBiogas can flourish and grow faster and bigger. So that's the biggest opportunity that we see. Just to give a sense of scale, the carbon projects that we develop today can potentially install more than 200,000 systems in just a few years. So it's really about locking the carbon finance.
It's really about doing a lot of good as a type of ripple effect, I would say. You have carbon markets at the core of your business model at Rewind. Does this, in your view, make it more difficult or easier to attract investors?
Honestly, it's very difficult to attract investors to invest in business models that rely solely on carbon credits. This is because the multi-trillion-dollar industry Eli just mentioned is everybody understands we need it in order to solve climate change. It's clear, the science is clear, everybody supports it. But the policy to force ourselves to clean up the CO2 waste in the sky is not there. That's one problem. And the second problem is that the existing voluntary carbon credit market is very confusing. You have carbon credits that you can buy for $2, $3, $4 per ton, and you have credits that you can buy for $600, $800 per ton. And if you're just a sustainability leader at Unilever, you don't necessarily understand why a ton can cost anywhere from $2 to $800. So there's a big credibility challenge in the carbon markets, and there's a transition from traditional carbon credits to what we like to call carbon removal credits, which pay for moving atoms from the air and keeping them away from the air for thousands of years. That's much more expensive. But we're optimistic for three reasons. One, Eli, and $4.5 trillion to come. And two, I think the US government is putting a critical mass of money into carbon removal with direct air capture hubs, $600 million of government funding going into these industries. And with the EU putting together the critical mass in policy with a framework for what is carbon removal just passed the EU legislation, along with upgraded ESG standard they call Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And soon they're expanding the ETS, and everybody's looking towards 2030, when carbon removal credits would be reintroduced into the regulated market. And then the trillion-dollar industry would come.
Yes, indeed. So I think that next, Carlota, it would be good to hear from you regarding the role that carbon markets play in Extantia's decision-making process regarding their investment portfolio. And is this an essential element? Is it good to have? What role do you see it as playing in early-stage deep tech VC investment?
So I think by the way, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, super, okay. So I think in generally, we do not like or do not favor business models that solely rely on a functioning carbon market because of the price fluctuation, right? So you can let's say you can perfectly call the time, you can invest in the best team in with the best ideas, with the best infrastructure, and then everything's going well, and there's like a 60-70% collapse in the price of a traded commodity. And obviously other businesses have exposure to commodity markets, but if we look at price volatility in carbon markets, it has been really quite extraordinary. However, the carbon markets still play an important part, especially kind of in carbon removals, in ensuring that there is a market and there is a customer demand. However, we're seeing that increasingly move towards bilateral agreements and offtake agreements away from actually open markets. So yes, it is important that companies, especially kind of in the removals space, can show that they can secure these type of offtakes agreements, but we're much more looking now at those bilateral agreements. What I would say maybe, and this is touching a little bit on Ram's point, where carbon markets start becoming really interesting for us is in the compliance markets, specifically what's happening now in the EU ETS, with the carbon border adjustment mechanism coming into play, and this effectively putting a tax on all polluting industries in Europe. That's really interesting because it now means that if you can produce a product with lower emissions, you can now start to justify a green premium because those dirty polluting industries have to pay these taxes. So in that aspect, kind of watching and being on top of the carbon markets is really important because it justifies a lot of the business models and justifies green premium potentially in Europe for the next few years to come.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more, and I think that in fact what we're seeing in terms of the convergence trend between projects that are being conducted within the voluntary market and the compliance markets is one of the major trends to watch. And in fact, when we work with startups in this space and devising a strategy there, that is one of the main points that we look at. So Eli, this is exactly the point where you come in, and I would really like to hear from you on what your outlook is regarding the trends, the major trends that we can expect over the next decade within carbon markets.
Sure. Okay, so before we get to that question, I'm hoping that together we can kind of demonstrate the point that Carlota and Ram made. So of the maybe 100 people listening right now, can you raise your hand if you are in a business or a consultancy firm or an investor that in some way is hoping will raise revenue via carbon credits? So you're working in a business and you're hoping someone will basically pay you to remove carbon from the atmosphere or to reduce emissions, or one of your portfolio companies will. Okay, so we have a whole bunch of hands up. Now can you raise your hand if you're planning on paying someone else to do that by buying carbon credits? No hands. Okay, so this is basically the essential problem with carbon markets today. We have a whole load of companies that are doing really great things, Ram, Boaz, everyone, and they're removing carbon from the atmosphere and they're hoping that they're going to be paid to do it, but there are no investors because you have a voluntary carbon market that unfortunately is voluntary. So it's a very, very, very small buyer base. Now, one last question for the audience. Can you put your hand up if you pay taxes? Great. Thankfully, lots and lots and lots of hands. And so the big trend that's going to happen in carbon markets is the only real buyer that's going to matter, in my mind, in 2030 is you can either think of it as the government that's paying for carbon removal via products like what Ram mentioned. There's something called the 45Q tax credit in America. There are things being designed in the EU. Or it's going to be people that pay their taxes, and they're going to be paying carbon taxes. So they're going to be paying what you can think of in accounting terms as having a liability that is based on their carbon emissions, and you need to match your liability with an asset. And so that asset is a carbon credit. And so the big trend in my mind of what's going to change is I'm actually, unfortunately, less hopeful that the ETS will ever contain carbon removal credits. This is getting into like a really specific area of policy. The EU ETS is kind of like the carbon tax in the EU, and it used to allow you to have carbon offsets from something called the CDM. That experience went horribly, and the EU is very, very scarred. But what they might do is allow you to pay basically border taxes, the CBAM that Carlota mentioned. Potentially, if you prove that you've paid for a carbon offset or you prove that you've paid to reduce carbon, maybe you can reduce your tax bill. So in terms of what the trend is, maybe taking a step back, anyone that raised their hand in the beginning that's interested in being paid to remove carbon from the atmosphere or being paid to lower emissions, you're basically working in policy. You're not really selling a commodity. No one's buying carbon to like fuel an airplane or build a building. You're buying a policy instrument. And so the thing you have to pay attention to is what happens in the EU, what happens in Israel, what happens in America. Like everything about your business is now on what policymakers consider is eligible for a tax, what policymakers consider companies have to do.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you, Eli. We really need to be quick about our second round, but I really want to hear from everyone quickly on this next set of questions. Carlota, I'd like to begin with you. Regarding a practical example that you can give us from Extantia's portfolio on the use of carbon markets.
Sure. I'll do two examples, two quick ones. One very relevant to the point that Ram made earlier. It's a company called B0. What B0 do is they do checks on quality on credits. So think of them like a credit rating agency for carbon markets. And what that is, and what that then enables to do is for investor or market participants to understand the risk associated with each of these credits, to kind of give the market more credibility, ensure that the buyers know what they're actually buying, and also to enable price signals to work, right? Naturally, what should happen is that low quality credits should be trading at a discount to higher quality credits. So in that sense, B0 is an enabler to that. The other one worth mentioning is a company called Yardstick. And what they do is they do MRV for soil carbon. And what's very interesting is that there's two aspects to it. One is if you want to have a soil carbon removal credit, you need to be able to prove that that the carbon is stored permanently, how much of it is stored, and all those good things to assure quality. And that's the technology that they again enable, where the customer are carbon project managers. Interestingly, though, we're now also seeing a shift here towards insetting because of some of the issues that we mentioned with voluntary carbon markets, where corporates are often finding that actually let's find the low-hanging fruit in our Scope 3 emissions and reduce them where we can before buying credits on the open market. And here something like Yardstick gives that solution as well, by enabling corporates and customers to verify the direct emissions reductions in their Scope 3.
Thanks, Carlota. That seems to me like really being hardcore carbon markets, I have to say. Super interesting investments, and I do know those two companies myself up close. Ram, if we look forward 5 years from now, where do you see Rewind in terms of its position within the carbon markets? Crystal ball.
5 years from now, we have full scientific support from the global scientific community that storing biomass in anoxic aquatic environments is safe and durable for thousands of years. And we have subsidiaries in Turkey and Georgia and Bulgaria, Romania, hopefully Ukraine as well. With these subsidiaries transporting organic carbon, mostly surplus wood from forests, while increasing the forest area and the forest carbon in the sources, and sequestering millions of tons of carbon in the Black Sea, taking anywhere from 10% or more from the EU's target of removing 50 megatons per year by 2030.
And nothing less. We wish you all of that. Eli, you probably have the most challenging question of the panel. Let's talk about Israel and its position. How do you think Israel should position itself, if at all, within global carbon markets?
I'm gonna answer the question really specifically about carbon, because I think there's many things to say about the way Israel positions itself that are nothing to do with our carbon markets. And I think maybe to go back to that $6 trillion number that we said at the beginning, this is the amount that we think we have to invest per year in the energy transition by 2030. And I think the problem for the Israeli innovation ecosystem is that the vast majority of that $6 trillion is in incredibly boring technologies that actually we know how to do really easily. Solar panels. The advantage there is not Israel, it's manufacturing in China. Transmission lines, maybe utility scale batteries. I think what Rewind and HomeBiogas are doing is amazing, but it's not the bulk of the spending of the energy transition. This is kind of like the luxury on the edge. And so I think what Israel could be really good at is enabling this to happen. Because there are a lot of barriers to very, very simple, very, very established technologies that we have the money for. They're very low risk and low return being implemented. Something that comes to mind for me is grids. Like, we need to lay huge transmission lines and link them up across the world. We don't know how to connect interregional grids. This is maybe an AI question. So basically, I think that if we look at the innovation in Israel, unlike the previous wave of Startup Nation, where we were really making new products and new technologies that could grow 1,000-fold and become kind of the basis of an innovation economy, actually we know what the technologies are that need to deliver the energy transition. It's renewable energy, it's electric cars, and it's grids. Very simple, not a VC play. But at the margins there are things that can enable it. So I think thinking about where the $5.5 trillion is going to be spent, and then that last $500 billion that could really change the Israeli economy, that's to me, with no offense to Rewind and HomeBiogas, where the global impact of Israel can be felt.
That's sort of like talking about the low-hanging fruit that Israel can leverage, and I hope there are at least a few government representatives in the audience taking some free advice from the top expert in the field. Please listen carefully. Now, Boaz, last but not least, very important question to you about practical advice. What would be your 3 top pieces of advice for entrepreneurs who are looking to leverage carbon markets in their business model?
Yes, so of course every technology varies from each other, so I can just relate to what from our experience. The first one would be to find the most suitable standard that may apply to your technology or project. Inventing a new standard or it takes a long time and it may not be successful after all. So even if it's not ideal but it works, go for it. The second one, which is important, is do the unit economics calculation based on the recognized global calculation and not on what you think you know about science. For example, HomeBiogas removed methane from the atmosphere. Based on science, methane traps heat 84 times more than CO2 over a 20-year period. However, in the carbon markets currently, the conversion ratio is 1 to 25 because the carbon standards are looking at 100 years based on the CO2 lasting time. So we have to calculate the unit economics based on 1 to 25 because this is what eventually will be credited and issued and paid for. So, and the last advice is to, I'm relating to Eli because it's a policy that you're selling. So start the policy as soon as possible. Start working about it, start thinking about it. Because first you will be able to learn a lot. Second, you'll be able to adjust whatever is necessary in your project or technology. It will save you a lot of time and money. So hopefully it helps someone.
Thank you, Boaz, and thank you to Eli, Ram, and Carlota. This has been fascinating. I can talk carbon markets all day, as everyone who knows me knows. But our session is over, and thank you all for listening.